It's 4 o'clock in Cairo, and this is World of Info. We're coming live from Studio 3. Our line number is 257-89407. Dua Muhammad is at the controls. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk, and today is the world of books from the world of info.
We will never win this one, but we know differently. They don't know.
So every once in a while we present books that I have read, and I would like to share with you these books. And the rule of the game is very simple. The first rule is read it, toss it, or skim it. And usually all these books deserve to be read. At least I have wasted some time reading them, but in the end I consider that the time was very valuable. So we have today, as usual, 4 books, and these 4 books are definitely of great interest. The first book is called القاهرة وما فيها, by the beautiful writer Mikawi Said, or the last book of Mikawi Said. The second book is by Dr. Ayman Fuad Said, دولة سلاطين المماليك في مصر, or the reign of the Mamluk sultans in Egypt. And the third book is الجالية الفرنسية في مصر, by Dr. Nouris Mohammed Saifuddin, and this is the French community in Egypt from 1882 till 1956. And the last book is an introduction, a very short introduction of the First World War, and it's written by Professor Michael Howard, and it's also another interesting book. So 4 books, and we will start right after this break. So this is the world of info, and today is the world of books, and we're starting right away with the first book. Yes, by Mikawi Said. Mikawi Said is a very talented writer, and unfortunately I have to say was a very talented writer. He died last year suddenly. He was not suffering from any diseases. He was just maybe in his first year after 60 or something like that. And he was a very kind, decent gentleman. He worked for some time as an accountant, but later on, whenever he was able to secure for himself breadwinning from writing, he decided to be a totally dedicated writer and left his job as an accountant in one of the firms. And he has been living in a downtown apartment with his sister, and he was a frequent visitor of the coffee shops and the midtown Cairo. He was in love with Cairo, and I think Cairo was in love with him. He had written a beautiful book about Cairo before that, and this was places and people in midtown Cairo. And this is his final book, which is a collection of his last articles that he intended to put in one book, and unfortunately it was published right away after his death. The title of the book is Cairo and Whatever It Is in It, Stories, Places and Times. And yes, times and places of Cairo is definitely very interesting time. To understand how to live in Cairo and how to become part of this heritage is very important. Just to be in love with the place, or going through modern Cairo or the old Cairo in Islamic quarters, in the famous Mu'izz al-Din Street, or the mosques of Cairo that is ornamentating and making this part of Cairo from Bab Zuwayla, or the Zuwayla Gate, till Bab al-Nasr, or the Gate of Nasr and Victory Gate, and Futuh, the Conquest Gate. All this makes yourself indulged in this beauty of the mosques surrounding the area. The smell of the spices and the food definitely is part of Cairo. This is part of Cairo that he was fond of, but the maximum fondness of Mikawi Said was Midtown Cairo, or what we call the modern Cairo. And of course it's not modern. There is nothing modern in Cairo. Cairo has been there for the past 1,000 years and more. So when we talk about the modern Cairo, we are talking about the innovations that were made by Ismail Pasha in Cairo when he started making new and modern buildings and modern streets in the region between the River Nile and Abdin Palace. This area, and which is afterwards has been conquered by a lot of builders and architects and entrepreneurs who built beautiful buildings that are still there. A place that is full of beautiful statues that are forming part of the history of Egypt. And 2 weeks ago, there was a race which was called the Downtown Marathon, or the Downtown Marathon of Cairo. It started from Zamalek and went around to the Maniel Island, and then towards the aqueduct of the Nile, and after that to Qasr al-Aini Street, heading towards Muhammad Farid Square, and then Mustafa Kamel, and then Tahrir, and then Talat Harb Square, and then Tahrir Square, back to Zamalek, and one lap around Zamalek. This is equivalent to 21 kilometers. For the people who ran only 10 kilometers, it was restricted to the midtown Cairo, around the square, the Tahrir Square, and the AUC, the old AUC campus. So, going through the streets of Cairo, if you walk or if you have run on that special day, maybe you would have had a glimpse of all the characters that Mekawi Said have shown us in his beautiful book, which is formed of a lot of short articles with a lot of photographs that are not only representing Egypt of the 40s or the 30s or even the 80s, but even he spoke about Cairo in the Middle Ages. Cairo that we have read all about, and people think of it, it was just a dream like living in 1000 Nights and One Night. Well, actually, it was definitely different. He has given us a glimpse of the life and times of famous singers like Almaz and Abdul Hamuli, and famous composers, music composers like Abdul Azim Abdul Haq. And he talked about the 3 Swedish ladies in Cairo, the beautiful book that we have once introduced the author of the book, and she spoke about this book in one of our episodes, and of course we have given a resume about this book. He has talked about Garden City, and about Sirajuddin House, the famous novel by Samia Sirajuddin, The House of the Family, or The Family House. He talked about Baligh Hamdi, about Muhammad Fawzi, and of course about the famous palace of Aisha Fahmi. So when you read this book, you'll definitely have to feel nostalgic. And when you go through the pages of this book, which is you are going to finish in a very short period of time, you'll find yourself unable to leave it, because Mekawi Said had a very beautiful way of writing, and the sentences were put together and gave us the beautiful essence of Cairo and of Mekawi Said. Mekawi Said has written some beautiful novels, and I believe one of them, and one of the best books of him was An Tuhibbak Jihan, which is a novel, a very big novel, a long novel, written by Mekawi Said. I think it's one of his last novels. And if you read it, you'll understand how emotional was that gentleman, how he was full of emotions, love, and definitely love of Cairo. A man who lived a very colorful life in the streets of Cairo and in the coffee shops of Cairo, and lived in an apartment quite near to Midtown Cairo. A man who left us last year and has written with his thoughts, emotions, and love beautiful books. A book deserves to be read in sort of remembering and a good memory of Mekawi Said, Al-Qahira wa ma fiha, the last book, Cairo and what it includes. So, more about books after the break.
You're locked in to the
So we're still World of Info, and today is the World of Books. We have given you a resume about the last book of Mekawi Said, Cairo, and what it includes. And we are going to the second book, which I think also is a very interesting book. A book which is called The Times or the State of Mamalik, of the Sultans, Mamluk Sultans in Egypt. And of course it is written by Dr. Ayman Fuad Said. Professor Ayman Fuad Said has written a very beautiful book about the Fatimid dynasty, which was his PhD from Sorbonne. And this book is a resume, is a short introduction to the Mamluk history. And of course, when we talk about the Mamluks and we say a short history, then this book will definitely be at least 200 pages, because you cannot write something shorter than that about the Mamluks. The Mamluk dynasties started to rule Egypt from the year 1250 till the year 1517, with the conquest of Egypt by the Ottomans. So from 1250 onwards, with the death of Salih Najm ad-Din Ayyub, when he was defending Egypt from the invasion of Louis the Ninth, and by the aid of his wife Shagar ad-Durr, who is considered to be the first Mamluk queen, or the first Mamluk king, if we may use the expression. So Shagar ad-Durr was the one who helped to keep the secret of the death of the king Salih Najm ad-Din Ayyub from the rest of the army, so that they don't have loss of morals. And she started giving orders to the knights of the king, the famous king, and telling that I am the one who's giving the orders, and stamping them with the stamp of the Sultan. Through this sharpness of her mind and her intelligence, she was able to control the situation and let the Mamluks knights present all what they have of courage, intelligence, wisdom, and daring attacks and tactics that were able not only to defeat the Crusaders, but also to capture their king Louis IX. So, of course, the credit, if it goes to Shagar ad-Durr for being the leader, it has to go to the famous knights at that time, of course, the Saif ad-Din Qutuz, the Zahir Babers, and Mu'izz Aybak. Aybak was apparently the least ambitious of them. When Shagar ad-Durr received a letter from the Abbasid Khalif and saying to them, if you don't have men, we can send you one, because he was so pissed off that a queen is now ruling Egypt. Shagar ad-Durr had to stay behind the scene and settle in with marrying to the weakest of the knights. And she considered Mu'izz Aybak to be the weakest. Well, actually, Aybak was not a weak man. He was pretending to be weak. So the moment he became the king, he put her in the harem and asked her to stay there. And he even, in order to establish a strong contact and connection with the Abbasid dynasty, wanted to give legitimacy to his reign by marrying one of the Abbasid princes. So, of course, Shagar ad-Durr, with the famous and the well-known idea of jealousy that could happen between women, decided that she's going to get rid of Aybak. She was greatly and deeply hurt. She decided to kill him, and when she killed him, the first wife of Aybak, the mother of his son, decided to take revenge, and she killed Shagar ad-Durr, throwing her body out of the citadel and waiting for maybe 2 or 3 weeks until one of the good people with good deeds came and took the body and buried Shagar ad-Durr in her mausoleum, which is right behind Sayyida Nafisa Mosque. So this was the short-lived time of Aybak and Shagar ad-Durr. But after that, what happened was part of history. The Mughals have advanced, they have slaughtered the Abbasids, they have burned Baghdad, and as they were coming, sweeping Damascus on their way, there had to be an Egyptian army to stop them. And this Egyptian army was led by 2 very important leaders, Saif ad-Din Qutuz, who was the Sultan, and Zahir Babers, who he was his right hand. Saif ad-Din Qutuz was able to defeat, with the help of Babers, the Mughals, and on their way back, Zahir Babers felt that Saif ad-Din Qutuz is going to betray him, and then he decided that he's going to assassinate and kill Saif ad-Din Qutuz. After this cold-blooded murder, what happened was that the Mamluks found Zahir Babers holding his sword after killing Saif ad-Din Qutuz, and asked him, who killed Babers? Who killed Saif ad-Din Qutuz? So Babers said, I did. So they looked at him with submission and said, then you'll be the king. So this would be the start of the real reign of Mamluks. So from the year 1260 onwards, we can see that the Mamluks, or the power, or the sultanate, goes to the most powerful sultan. If for short periods of time the young children of the sultan are so young and they go to the throne, they are puppet sultans. They are either overthrown by the strong Mamluks, or they are kept there as puppets while the other strong Mamluks are controlling the situation from behind curtains. It was up to a strong man by the name of Zahir Baybars to found the real strong empire of the Mamluks. From 1260 to 1277, he led a very, very strong state, Islamic state or Mamluk state, that extended all through the way to Damascus and Syria, Palestine, and of course including the holy places, the holy shrines in Mecca and in Medina. Zahir Baybars was one of the most efficient administrators and one of the most efficient men who ruled Egypt. After his reign, after being assassinated unintentionally by taking poisoned milk, his throne went to two of his sons, Baraka Khan and Salamish. Both of them were his sons and were young, and Baraka Khan was the son-in-law of the famous Mamluk Qalawun. Qalawun decided to overthrow Baraka Khan, his son-in-law, and decided to rule Egypt, and therefore it was founded, the empire, the state that belonged to Qalawun. For 100 years, from 1280 until the year 1382, Egypt has been ruled by somebody who's related to Qalawun, whether it is his sons, his grandsons, or his great-grandsons, or even at a short time, his Mamluks. So this is the first Mamluk dynasty, or the first Mamluk state, which is called the Bahari Mamluk. After that was the Borgi Mamluk. The Borgi Mamluk were, they are more or less Turkish, and their descent, there were the first Mamluks were the Turkish, and the other Mamluks were the Sharkis Mamluk. So the Circassian Mamluks, or the Borgi Mamluks, because they lived in the barracks of the citadel, were quite different from the Mamluks of the Bahari Mamluk. In fact, that they had come here to Egypt when they were not that young, so maybe in their late teens or their early 20s. So these new knights who were raised and sold to the important people, to the sultans, they kept them and they bred them and they gave them the education, and their job was to defend the country. Some of them were very bad, some of them were good, but it was a state, or a military state, that Egypt was a part of it. So when you look at this, and you have to keep in mind that at that period of time there was the medieval period that extended from 1250 till 1517. There were times of high and times of low. Egypt was having great builders like Nasser Muhammad, or his father Qalawun himself, or Baybars, who built two beautiful mosques, a mosque and a school. Unfortunately, the school has been destroyed. And of course, beautiful mosques like Sultan Hassan Mosque and Qaitbay, Qanso al-Ghuri mosques, and the group of historians that lived at that time, the scientist Ibn Khaldun, who came and spent his last years in Egypt producing his magnificent book, Muqaddimat Ibn Khaldun, or the introduction of Ibn Khaldun. So scientists, philosophers, historians, physicians, and architects were living in Egypt, producing a civilization. The Mamluk civilization, or the country of Egypt that was strong, living on taxation of the commerce that was going between India and Europe, had to reach an end, unfortunately, with the late 15th century, with the discovery of the route of Good Hope, where then Egyptian Mamluk state lost a lot of its income that was coming from taxation on the goods, acting as a middleman. So the lives and the times of Egypt, Mamluk dynasties, is a very important book to read by Ayman Fuad Said. If you have the time to read it, this will be a very good introduction for you to understand the real truth about the Mamluks, of the people who founded a great country, and people who really founded a great city, ornamented it with beautiful mosques and beautiful places. So the sophisticated times and lives of the Mamluks definitely deserve to be read. You have to read this as part of your history, and maybe you'll find more and more information. So, a book that deserves to be read, The State of the Mamluk Sultans in Egypt, by Ayman Fuad Said, Professor Ayman Fuad Said, a book that deserves to be read. After the break, we'll have more books to talk about. So we're still with World of Info, the world of books, and the third book in a row, which is another very interesting book. Actually, this is a PhD that is written by Dr. Nouris Mohammed Saifuddin in history, and it talks about the French community in Egypt from 1882 till 1956. It's a very accurate study. It shows the rise and the fall of the number of the French people living in Egypt. It designates that there are two different ideas to look at these French people. Some of them were native French people, and others were Egyptians or other people who would have taken up the French citizenship because of the prestigious role that is given to the and the benefits that are given to foreigners who are living in Egypt because of the law of the mixed courts. You know that there was a law of mixed courts, especially after 1882, after the invasion of Britain to Egypt, that led that all the foreigners, whenever they are involved in any medical legal fight, they would go to the mixed courts. So they will not go to the national Egyptian courts. And these foreign courts, or these mixed courts, were led by foreign judges. And therefore, there was a dual law system in Egypt, which is totally unfair. It's against the state and the idea of having an independent government that is Egypt. When you look at this mixed court system, you'll find that a lot of people, especially with those who came to Egypt in the 19th century after the during the Said Pasha reign and during Ismail Pasha reign, a lot of Europeans came to Egypt because they found that Egypt will have a very good chance of for their money to invest and to start jobs and to start working and so on. So these people, when they came to Egypt, found out that with the law of the mixed courts, they will be able to be taken up as first-class citizens. Because if they are not carrying the Egyptian citizenship, which is something that they carefully avoided to have, and kept their own original passports, they will stay as foreigners and therefore take up a good hand in protecting themselves and their businesses from any national court system. So these people, when the Egyptian nationality started to be given to the people, and in the beginning, in the early 20th century, in 1904 onwards, there was the Egyptian nationality is given to everybody who can prove that he was born in Egypt or that he has a father living in Egypt or a grandfather who's Egyptian. And some of these foreigners could have proved that very much, but they refused and they denied themselves this chance because they wanted to keep the other nationality. So when we're talking about the French community in Egypt, we'll be stunned to find that it was a very big population in comparison to the population of the whole Egypt at that time. We can say that there was about almost 10,000 French people living, give and take more or less, from the period of the study, especially from the 20th century onward. We know that there was a census that was done in Egypt in the year 1917, 1927, and 1937. So the census was also made on nationality, and therefore it was a bit accurate. So we can find a rise or fall in the numbers between 9 to 10,000 French people living in Cairo area, almost about 7 to 8,000 people living in Alexandria, and about 1,000 French people living in the Suez Canal area. And of course, there are some French people, minority, a very small amount of this community is living in Upper Egypt. So what type of jobs they were doing? They were doing everything. There were, some of them are technical staff, white collars, doctors, physicians, engineers, architects, lawyers, judges. Some of them were in business of commerce, and some of them were in very desperate situation and have applied for a lot of installments, and they wanted to take money or amount of money from the government, or as a sort of compensation, or trying to pay for the bills, and of course this is very interesting. So when we're talking about these two different types of people who are living with the whole spectrum of very rich people and very poor people asking for donations, and people who are living barely living, we can say that this was a wide spectrum of the French people. So what type of life they were living? Most of them were living in different quarters. They were living around Abdin. They were living in higher places, such as in Zamalek and in Garden City, but some of them were living also in Zahar and Heliopolis. Alexandria, they were living in Alexandria is a big cosmopolitan city, and strange enough, the population of the French in Alexandria was much less than the Greeks and the Italians. So it comes number 3 or number 4 even. So the lives and the times of the French people, definitely they lived a very happy life. They enjoyed their stay in Egypt very much, and unfortunately this had to be brought to an abrupt end. The abrupt end happened in two situations. The first, that a lot of the Egyptian Jews didn't keep their they didn't ask for the Egyptian nationality, so some of them were having the French passports. So when the 1956 attack, the tripartite attack of Egypt, which was involved in it was Britain, the French, and the Israel, the French citizens were forced to leave Egypt abruptly, because it was a strait of animosity between Egypt and France at that short period of time. Some of these businesses were confiscated, and in order to pay for the compensation of what the French air raids and the French attacks that happened in Port Said area and the Suez Canal and Alexandria and Cairo. So unfortunately, the political situation in 1956 gave an end to a very dynamic, thriving community of French. What remains of this is very important is the schooling system. The French had introduced a very beautiful schooling system from the 1854 onwards. It was not related to the French community in Egypt. It was related to other areas. There were two sections, or two types of school. The missionary schools, that is, for example, the Jesuit and the Frere and the Sacré-Cœur, these types of schools were related to the Catholic Church, and therefore they were totally independent of the French government. There were also the lycée schools that were more or less related or giving the French curriculum, and therefore these schools which were had to be subjected to the nationalization after the 1956 war. So the schools have produced great generations of Egyptians who have learned liberal education. They have received beautiful French education, but with total respect to the religion of the students. So not only were there Christian students or foreign students in these schools, but on the contrary, there were a lot of students who were Muslims. Even the majority were Muslims, and they were given their religion faithfully, so there's no problem. It was not a missionary work. And at the same time, in these schools, they were also giving a chance for, in some of the schools, especially in rural areas outside Cairo, they were giving chance for the people who cannot afford, especially the intelligent kids. They were given scholarships to get a free education in these schools. So the French education was a very eminent and very important. Another important point was the role of the French community in teaching in the University of Egypt, the Egyptian University, especially the French language and the French literature. And we can find that for a very long period of time in schools of law and in schools of commerce and in schools of literature, as I've just given mention, there were a lot of French professors coming and educating and teaching. And these were, after the nationalization, were given exemption to continue their valuable work in illuminating and in enriching the life of the Egyptian students. So when we talk about the French schooling system, or the French or the Egyptian life and times, we have to talk about the French culture, but we'll do that after the break. So we're still talking about the French community in Egypt, and we have talked about the population, we have talked about the nationality, we have talked about the types of works that they were living, the cities and the states that the jobs that they were performing. But we'll talk about something interesting. We have talked about the education, about the schooling system, but let's talk about the French culture per se. Yes, the French had a great influence on the Egyptian culture, especially on the higher educated class at that period of time. They were able, in spite of the British occupation of Egypt, to spread the use of the French language in the governmental places. So we can find that there were, with the French education that was promoted through the schooling systems of the Jesuit and the Frere and the Lycée, there has been the rich people, the people who belong to the A class and the B class, started enrolling their students, their children, in the French schools. And strange enough, the amount of the French schools was higher than the amount of the number of the English schools in Egypt and in Cairo and Alexandria. And therefore, all these people started sending their children to the French schools, whether these were the Frere or Jesuit or the Pompasteur or Sacré-Cœur, and this helped to improve and increase the French language spread. Also, the French language was the language that has been given in by the royal family as a sort of, in all its written documents, if there is a foreign language that will be used beside Arabic, it will be French, not English. And the Egyptian royal court has decided to use the French language in giving the decretos and the degrees in French during the royal time, during the King Farouk time. And all the documents concerning the founding of companies in Egypt, or any Egyptian company, had limited companies, had to be their documentation, the original documentations were made in two languages, Arabic and French. And all the prime ministers of Egypt before the revolution used French language in their writing letters and documents with foreign diplomats, even, and the most important of all, and very peculiarly, with the English or the British. And therefore, all the documents that were sent between the Egyptian Foreign Service and the British Embassy in Cairo were sent in French. In 1950, the British Embassy decided to send a sort of a letter and asking that they should be addressed and talked to in English, not in French. So the Egyptian Foreign Service in 1950 decided to write back and said, okay, we'll talk to you and we'll send you documents and letters in English. But the judge, or every ministry in Egypt has a sort of a legal council. Usually this legal council is a judge on the lease from the state council, and these usually are very intelligent and very well informed councils who used to work as judges. So he said that Egypt, or the Egyptian Foreign Service, should not accept to use the English language, and it should return and revert to the use of the French language, because according to the law of at that time of the Egyptian government, the two languages that are used are the Arabic language, and if there any translation should be used or any wordings should be used in a foreign language, this foreign language would be French, not English. So the Egyptian Foreign Service minister answered to the judge, to the legal council of the Foreign Service, and said, okay, I accept your comment and I will submit. And he also declared that it happened only twice that they sent letters to the British Embassy in English, and they will revert on the spot to sending in French. So this was a sort of a very interesting idea about the spread of the French language. We have definitely dealt with the amount of people who were working also in the Egyptian service of the government. There were a lot of French employees. We talked about the French professors who were studying who were teaching in the French universities, and we also have to talk about the people who worked in different places and sections, including the postal service, including the railway service, and other engineers everywhere of Egypt. So this is the idea of the French culture in Egypt and how it has spread through the Egyptian community. So talking about the French and the Egyptians, we will find that that what has left of the French language is after the 1952 revolution. Not a lot of the free officers spoke French language, but there were important people who have had an education in this, and of course in French. And this was Sarwat Okasha and Ali and Hussein Sabri Zulfuqar. So you know, Ali Sabri became the prime minister in a very important period of time, and Sarwat Okasha is the founder of, or the real founder of, the Ministry of Culture, with his perspective, and definitely a man who has had a great influence on the Egyptian cultural world with his revolutionary reign on the Egyptian culture ministry. So the less important, the importance of the French language, unfortunately, has decreased by time, more than before the revolution, when the people started to get more education in English and in other universities, especially when they're going abroad, heading for other education. So the effect and the influence of the French culture has remained. People who are very important and affected the culture aspect had culture education in France, and of course the famous Rifat Tahtawi, and of course the famous important man in the 20th century, and this is Taha Hussein himself. So Tawfiq al-Hakim also received education in France, and therefore we can say always that the influence of the French community and the influence of the French culture on the Egyptians remain always to be examined. So an interesting book, a PhD thesis that is carefully studied by Dr. Nouris Mohammed Saifuddin about the French community in Egypt from 1882 till 1956, is a book that has to be read in depth and an understanding of the influence of the French community and the rise and the decline, unfortunately, of the number of this French community that lived in Egypt. Another book which deserves to be read. So we're still with the world of books from World of Info, and the final book is a book that is very interesting because it talks about a very short introduction to the First World War. Yes, we are celebrating the 100. Last year we were celebrating 100 years of the end of the World War I. The war that was called the War to End All Wars. The war that was supposed to spread peace. The war that was supposed, as meant by the victorious Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States of America, who came and saved the situation by sending in the American army and the American economy behind the Allies and finishing the war by simply the fact that they were present, and enormous supplies that they're having had to put an end to the very much suffocated, economically depleted Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German Empire, and of course the Ottoman Empire. So Woodrow Wilson was the one who decided to start a new world, a world that will be full of peace, full of love and life, and times will improve, and the fact that the world will live happily after. But unfortunately, this was denied. The French and the British didn't take it lightly, and they asked for a lot of compensation from the defeated and depleted Germany. the destruction and the total jeopardization of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was doomed from the very beginning. The fact that it is formed of different types of people who are amalgamated by a thin thread of connection definitely had to end. The amount of fines and the amount of land that had to be given by the German people, of course, and the amount of compensations that were to be paid, and the fact that Woodrow Wilson couldn't keep his promise for the declaration of that all the countries will have a rightful chance to determine their fate, which was a fate that was denied for the Middle East people, for the Egyptians and for the people of the Middle East totally. And of course for the Balfour Declaration. All this has cultivated the seed of turmoil of World War II. The seed of the war that in less than 20 years from Woodrow Wilson's dream of having a peaceful world, the world was going to war which was more devastating than the First World War. And the world was going to a turbulent 20th century just because of the First World War and its sister, the Second World War. So when you read a book that is trying to analyze and give you an idea about why did the First World War occur from the start, what was the competition between these old empires, what brought the United States in, and why did the Americans come in very late in the last year, why didn't they join in the first year, and why the war extended and engulfed more people, and why there were so very much casualties, and why everyone was so romantic about this war, because this war never touched the lives of some people who were away from the air raids, because the air raids didn't happen except in the end of the war. What type of life that was doomed, or what type of empires that were doomed after this war, how the Ottoman Empire was devastated, destroyed and dismantled in just 4 years, even with the loss of the whole Ottoman system. How did it fall and fail that easily? What brought everything down, and what brought the magnificent or the strong United States out, and what kept the British Empire and the French Empire, which were very heavily hurt in the war, and yet their economy was able to survive and to emerge successfully from such great devastation. The rise of the nationalization or the national feeling of the Australians and the New Zealanders, knowing for the first time that they are a definite state, that they are a country that has an army, and a country that is going to stay and become definitely an independent state by more time to go. So, reading a short introduction by Professor Michael Howard, a man who has worked in 2 distinguished universities, Oxford and Harvard, in teaching modern history. I think it is Oxford and Yale, I think his book deserves to be read. And it is beautifully translated by Dr. Rafat Said Ali, who graduated from the medical school in Cairo University and dedicated his life to translating beautiful books from English to Arabic. I really recommend this book to be read, and I definitely believe that the Arabic prose in it is so perfect. So, today was the world of books from the world of info. We had 4 books to present to you, and I believe that 4 of them deserves to be read. القاهرة وما فيها, Cairo and what is in it, by Mikawi Said. The State of the Mamluk Sultans in Egypt, دولة سلاطين المماليك في مصر, by Dr. Ayman Fuad Said. The French Community in Egypt from 1882 till 1956, by Dr. Nouris Mohammed Saifuddin. And last but not least, a short introduction to World War I by Professor Michael Howard. Please have a beautiful weekend and a beautiful afternoon, and try to read something this weekend. Maybe you'll get a glimpse of one of these books. My name is Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was at the controls. See you next week, same studio, same station, from Radio Cairo, World of Info.